water treaty between Egypt and Sudan, as well as the demand by Ethiopia to enter into water sharing agreement within 10 years in accordance with the Nile Basin Comprehensive Framework Agreement. Since the divergent views were of legal and political nature, and according to Article 10 of the Declaration of Principles, the Sudanese side suggested invoking Article 10 thereof, that's of the Declaration of Principles, to refer the issue to the heads of state and government. So till now, we believe the Khartoum process is not yet exhausted, and Khartoum can play a further role in solving this problem within the African initiative. Mr. President, we are confident that the draft agreement proposed by Sudan during the last round, namely on June 14th, constitutes a comprehensive, fair, and balanced draft, which the three countries can adopt as the basis for their negotiations. The details of this draft are incorporated in the annexes of the letter of Her Excellency, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Sudan, sent to the Security Council, dated 24th June 2020. It is our conviction that with political will and commitment, the three countries can conclude this historic agreement. Mr. President, we highly regard the involvement with the African Union through its chairperson, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, and in the extraordinary summit which took place virtually on 26 June 2020. The three concerned countries participated and addressed the summit along with the members of the African Bureau and the chairperson of the African Union. The outcome of that mini summit was circulated by the Commission of the African Union, which welcomed the commitment by the three parties to the African Union-led process and called for the following: requesting the Security Council to take note of the fact that the African Union is seized of the matter, lending a renewed impetus to the tripartite negotiations, urging the parties to find mutually acceptable and amicable solution to the outcome issues, calling the parties to refrain from making any statement or any action that may jeopardize and complicate the African Union process, and finally, establishment of committees to reach amicable solutions within 1 week. Mr. President, we strongly believe that the African-led process can push forward the three parties' efforts to reach comprehensive, fair, and balanced agreement. In light of the significant process scored earlier, putting in mind the draft agreement made by Sudan during the last rounds of negotiations, and within the 7-point consensus reached by the extraordinary summit of the African Union. Mr. President, in conclusion, and with reference to the content of the two letters by the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sudan, which were presented to the Security Council on 2nd and 24th June, respectively, I reiterate the request of the government of the Sudan. Number one, to call on the leaders of the three countries to demonstrate their political will and commitment by resolving the few remaining issues and conclude the agreement. Number two, call upon the parties to adopt the comprehensive draft Sudan has submitted as the basis of finalizing the agreement. And number three, discourage all parties from any action that may jeopardize the efforts by the African Union. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Soudan pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Éthiopie.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, my warm greetings to all Security Council members. My greetings also go to Minister Shukri and my good friend, Ambassador Omar Sadiq of Sudan. Mr. President, as the founding member of the United Nations, Ethiopia's commitment to the principles and purpose of the United Nations Charter has been solid and consistent. It has always been a staunch supporter of the principles of collective security and multilateralism. Ethiopia's track record in this regard speaks for itself. It has always adhered to and actively supported and promoted these principles at regional and international levels. In its entire history, Ethiopia has never caused a threat to any country. It has instead been contributing to the cause of peace through its active participation in peacekeeping and peace building since the early days of the United Nations up until now. This said, let me be clear that Ethiopia doesn't believe the issue being discussed today has a legitimate place in the Security Council. It is bound to set a bad precedent and open a Pandora box. This council should not be a forum for exerting diplomatic pressure. As we have informed the Council, the tripartite negotiation between Ethiopia, Egypt, and the Sudan has not yet been concluded. The three countries have in fact reached consensus on most of the prominent technical issues in the last rounds of the negotiation. That's why Ethiopia is of the view that progress at hand and a mutually beneficial agreement is within reach. Even if the three countries fail to resolve their differences on the outstanding issues, the Declaration of Principles, DOP, signed in 2015 by their leaders, provides for dispute settlement mechanisms which are yet to be exhausted. Furthermore, the African Union has the necessary goodwill and expertise to help the three countries in bridging their differences and reaching a mutually acceptable solution. It is indeed lamentable, to say the least, that the principles of complementarity and subsidiarity between the UN and regional organizations, much talked about in this council, was ignored when the issue related to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam was unjustifiably brought to its attention. It also contravenes Article 33 of the United Nations Charter, which stipulates that parties to any dispute, among others, shall first resort to regional agencies or arrangements. Members of the Council are aware that 3 days ago, as mentioned earlier, the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union held an extraordinary meeting under the chairmanship of His Excellency President Ramaphosa. As stated in the communique issued on 27 June 2020, the three countries agreed to resume negotiation and resolve the remaining issues through tripartite consultation under an AU-led process in the spirit of Pan-African solidarity and within the framework of African solution to African problems. Therefore, the African Union is now seized of the matter, and it's only appropriate that this Council allows the AU-led process to take its course. Mr. President, needless to say, the Nile is as important to Ethiopia as it is to Egypt and the Sudan as a source of livelihood and economic development. The GERD is conceived as the centerpiece of our national development aspiration. Ethiopia generates 86% of the total average annual flow of the Nile waters, but it has never benefited from the river at all. The 1959 agreement between Egypt and the Sudan has apportioned the entire waters of the Nile between the two of them, with Egypt securing the lion's share, leaving nothing for Ethiopia. That was the unilateralist decision to have ever been taken concerning transboundary rivers. In 1997, Egypt again took another unilateral decision and built the Toshka and the Peace Canals, taking the Nile water away from its natural course. Ethiopia's repeated complaints over this project since the mid-1950s fell on deaf ears. The first complaint was made by the government of Emperor Haile Selassie regarding the 1959 agreement. Egypt ignored Ethiopia's subsequent objections. Despite these historical facts, Egypt continues to accuse Ethiopia of taking unilateralist action with respect to the building of the GERD, as you heard earlier. Mr. President, Ethiopia is not asking too much. It is seeking to correct past injustice and share this precious resource in an equitable and reasonable manner. Despite being endowed with abundant water resource in the Nile Basin for years, the people of Ethiopia have been deprived of their right to use the resource to extricate themselves from abject poverty. This is why, for Ethiopia, accessing and utilizing its water resource is not a matter of choice, but of existential necessity. The unfortunate reality is that today, in 2020, tens of millions of Ethiopians still use firewood as a primary source of fuel, with severe consequences to their health and the environment. All rural households, where 85% of Ethiopians live and nearly two-thirds of school children are forced to stay in darkness. This is a reality. By contrast, nearly 100% of Egyptian population, both in the cities and rural areas, have access to electricity. Therefore, Ethiopia believes that it has a national and moral imperative to do everything in its power to improve the lives of its people. GERD is an answer to Ethiopian mothers' cries for help, so that they don't have to trek hours to collect firewood. The unfortunate reality is that pregnant mothers are still being carried on stretchers over a long distance due to lack of electricity to access life-saving emergency medical care. The image of young girls with back-breaking loads of firewood on their shoulders is also a daily reality. Once completed, the dam will generate 15,700 gigawatt hours annually, bringing electricity and an opportunity for a dignified life to more than 65 million people who currently live in complete darkness. That is why we are emphasizing again and again that GERD is a development project and it cannot in any way be a matter of security threat. If there is a security threat there to be discussed, it has to do with the fact that there are millions of Ethiopians living under the poverty line. The dam is meant to uplift these people, and in a way, it is averting a potential threat rather than posing any. Seeking social progress and better standards of life for our people, leaving no one behind, is indeed consistent with the spirit of the UN Charter and the Sustainable Development Goals that we all aspire to achieve in 2030. The GERD is also one of the mega projects envisaged under Ethiopia's effort to meet the African Union Agenda 2063. I should also underline here why the GERD is a people's project, which is being built by Ethiopians from all walks of life with an unprecedented zeal and commitment. It is to be recalled that various obstacles were created to prevent Ethiopia from accessing international support. My government is just coordinating a public-owned, public-funded project. Therefore, it has a solemn responsibility to bring this project to a successful completion. Mr. President, from the very beginning, Ethiopia took an unprecedented initiative to create understanding with both Egypt and Sudan on the GERD by, among others, establishing the International Panel of Experts and the Tripartite National Committee to implement its recommendation, and later the National Independent Scientific Research Group to formulate different scenarios and the first filling and annual operation of the GERD. All this initiative failed to deliver the desired result because of Egyptian intransigence and its insistence on historic rights and current use. The reason why Egypt has been consistently engaged in scuttling the tripartite negotiation has more to do with its own internal situation than anything else. On the other hand, Sudan knows full well the benefits of the dam. Be that as it may, Ethiopia has been guided by the internationally accepted principle of equitable and reasonable utilization and not causing significant harm in building the dam. Ethiopia cannot harm Egypt and the Sudan through the dam, because if to harm is not to release water, then building it in the first place would have been meaningless and purposeless. We are all the people of the Nile. Therefore, Ethiopia cannot harm Egypt without harming itself. The DOP clearly encapsulates Ethiopia's firm commitment to the principles of transboundary water utilization. In fact, Ethiopia's good faith efforts have been unprecedented in the history of transboundary rivers. It doesn't deserve to be mistreated. It should be instead be commended for demonstrating exemplary cooperation. Mr. President, in October 2019, at the request of Egypt, the United States government invited the three countries to Washington, D.C. for consultation. Ethiopia responded positively in good faith and hoping that the presence of observers will help facilitate the negotiation. However, Egypt sought to impose unacceptable terms on Ethiopia by leveraging and influencing the process. Unfortunately, Egypt's actions muddied the water even further. Throughout the course of the negotiations, Ethiopia has shown a great deal of flexibility in the tripartite process to build the necessary trust and confidence. As a demonstration of its good faith gesture, Ethiopia agreed to fill the GERD reservoir from 4 to 7 years, although it could be filled in 3 years without causing significant harm to Egypt and the Sudan. Furthermore, Ethiopia agreed to postpone the second phase of the first filling if annual inflow at the GERD is below 31 billion cubic meters. Mr. President, the three countries have already agreed on the initial filling of the dam. Luckily, Mother Nature is an agreement too. This year is an opportune time to begin impounding water in the GERD reservoir. Currently, both the Blue Nile and the White Nile have above normal flow. Lake Victoria is at a record high level. The highest one dam is also at its full supply level of 182 meters above sea level, which is a record high for the past 40 years or 4 decades. During the first stage of the impoundment, which is a testing or a trial, Ethiopia will retain only about 1/10 of the average annual flow of the Blue Nile. By contrast, every year, twice the amount of the water retained during the initial filling of the GERD is lost to evaporation from the highest one dam. This is in addition to the wastage through water-intensive flood irrigation practice in Egypt. Water is increasingly becoming a scarce commodity. More than 60% of Ethiopia's surface area is dry land with no sustaining water resource. Egypt, on the other hand, is endowed with plenty of groundwater resources and has access to seawater, which could be desalinated for use. Mr. President, in any transboundary watercourse, drought management is the joint responsibility of all riparian countries. But Egypt wants Ethiopia to shoulder the burden of drought alone. Water use or dam operation rules are dependent on the availability of water. They depend on the Almighty God. Hence, operation rules must have special guidelines, creating 2 different hydrological conditions, including drought. Therefore, the 3 countries must agree on drought threshold and cooperative mechanism for sharing the responsibility for addressing and mitigating any consequences of drought and climate change. Furthermore, Ethiopia believes that any future dispute arising from the use of the Blue Nile water should be resolved in line with the principles agreed to in the DOP, which provides for a mechanism that allows the 3 countries to address their grievances through conciliation, mediation, by referring the matter for the consideration of our heads of state and governments. Ultimately, Ethiopia believes any agreement must not in any way constrain its sovereign right to future use and upstream development on the Blue Nile. Mr. President, the involvement of the Security Council on this issue risks hardening position and making compromise even more difficult. Instead of pronouncing itself on this matter, the Council should defer to the African Union and encourage the three countries to return to the tripartite negotiation as the only means to finding an amicable solution to the remaining outstanding issues. We also hope the Council would be cautious not to amplify differences and undermine the AU-led process. The statement we just heard from our brother, Minister Shukri, glaringly shows that the AU-led mechanism is seen in a very precarious situation. The statement casts serious doubt. In this momentous year, marking the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, I wish to recall a moment in history when another Ethiopian leader, Emperor Haile Selassie, spoke before the League of Nations to make a moral case against the scourge of colonialism and the invasion of my country. He warned that it is us today, it will be you tomorrow. The League of Nations, unfortunately, did little to heed that call. It would be regrettable if Ethiopia's call today not to politicize and internationalize the issue of the GERD is not heeded by this August Council. We can only hope that the Council will choose to be on the right side of history, for in a lot of ways, the matter being dealt with by the Council today is deeply rooted in a colonial legacy. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by emphasizing the fact that the Nile Basin country enjoy one of the oldest relationships in human history, as many of you mentioned earlier. The seeds of our common development were planted not today, thousands of years ago. Our time-tested links through the Nile should provide us with the trust and faith to do what is just for the betterment of all of our peoples. The GERD offers a unique opportunity for transboundary cooperation between our sisterly countries. It should never be an object of competition or mistrust. In this spirit, Ethiopia will pursue an amicable solution through a win-win negotiation. We also seek the understanding of our brothers and sisters from Egypt and Sudan. We are confident that we will reach a cooperative agreement in the coming weeks under the AU-led process. The Council should defer to the African Union, be cautious not to amplify differences, and encourage the three countries to return to the tripartite negotiation as the only avenue for finding a lasting resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Éthiopie pour sa déclaration. Je crois que M. Choukri souhaite dire à nouveau quelques mots.
To be in a position to have to comment on some of the statement of His Excellency, the distinguished representative of Ethiopia. But I would only like to mention that unlike our statement where we abided by the outcome of the Bureau meeting, we made no accusations as relates any of the positions of our co-riparians. Unfortunately, once again, the permanent representative of Ethiopia has lodged unsubstantiated accusations directed to Egypt, which would be considered as having contravened the outcome of the Bureau meeting in terms of how he might address this issue in a manner that does not further complicate it. I might be in a position to refute every single one of those accusations. But once again, in terms of the responsibility that we have shown for a decade of negotiations, I would refrain in respect of the Bureau meeting outcomes and will consider it sufficient to have made these brief comments. Thank you.
Je remercie Son Excellence Monsieur Choukri pour ses derniers commentaires. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs inscrits sur la liste et la séance est levée.
Mr. President, Ethiopia is asking for the floor again.
Okay. Le représentant de l'Éthiopie for very short comments. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much for giving me a second chance. I didn't in any way make a statement that contravenes the spirit of the AU head of states encouragement that was made a couple of days. The spirit was one of a kind for all of us to come together and solve the outstanding issues. But the understanding that was clearly reverberated in the speech of Foreign Minister Shukri is that it casts a doubt on the commitment of the AU Bureau of Decision because a resolution is presented to the Security Council to consider it on a later day. While on the other hand, following strictly, in our case, the decision in its totality and in its spirit of the Africa Bureau, we didn't vouch to file a complaint or look for a parallel track. That has by itself given us a message and in a way resonated that our brothers in Egypt are following parallel tracks while at the same time committing themselves to the Africa Bureau head decision. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Éthiopie pour sa déclaration. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs inscrits sur la liste. La séance est levée. La séance du Conseil de sécurité tenue par visioconférence est ouverte. Je me réfère au projet de résolution publié sous les cotes S 2020-595 et S 2020-600. La procédure de vote sur les projets de résolution a été lancée le 26 juin 2020 et a pris fin le 29 juin 2020. Conformément à la procédure spéciale écrite sur laquelle les membres du Conseil se sont entendus et qui est définie dans la lettre du président du Conseil de sécurité en date du 27 mars 2020. J'attire l'attention des membres du Conseil sur le projet de résolution publié sous la cote S 2020-595 déposé par les États-Unis d'Amérique et la Fédération de Russie au titre de la question intitulée « La situation au Moyen-Orient ». Le résultat du vote est le suivant. Le projet de résolution a recueilli 15 voix pour. Le projet de résolution est adopté à l'unanimité en tant que résolution 25-30. J'attire l'attention des membres du Conseil sur le projet de résolution publié sous la cote S 2020-600, déposé par la France au titre de la question intitulée « La situation au Mali ». Le résultat du vote est le suivant. Le projet de résolution a recueilli 15 voix pour. Le projet de résolution est adopté à l'unanimité en tant que résolution 25-31. La séance est levée.
Are you sure?